to all the participants, and welcome to this OET seminar. Today we have Luca Andriani presenting social trust and firm innovation in Chinese provinces. And well, innovation, of course, is central in Chinese strategies. Also, it's interesting for us for our research area of OET research area about economic development, growth, inequality. Then, so we are glad to have Luca presenting this paper here today, and the analysis is at the level of provinces, looks at the effects of social trust on innovation outcomes like patents, and then Luca will enter into all also methodological details, I think, and we can probably ask questions for clarification during presentation. Lucas said he does not mind to be interrupted for clarification, and then we have a question and answer session at the end of the paper. So Luca, you are very welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marta. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for inviting me here for presenting this. This is not even at the stage of a paper. I would say that it is an embryo of a work in progress, because it's social trust and firms innovation in Chinese provinces. And it's a work co-author with Gagisi Zashirov and Futsi Xuan. Now, it's a work in progress, but I think the platform of the Observatorio is an ideal one, because I think it fits with the research areas, and we are looking forward to receive feedback to improve the work and to show you also further steps we are planning to conduct. Now, the research focus is essentially relatively simple, in the sense that given that in the literature social trust has been considered a valuable asset for fostering cooperations and essentially collaborative behavior, we use social trust as a collective asset to test whether in Chinese provinces with higher social trust, firms' innovation in terms of number of patents application is more pronounced. Now, I anticipated some preliminary outcome is that it seems that there is indeed a positive association between these two elements of social trust and a number of patents applications. And this positive association is also robust to a series of sensitivity analysis and to a specific identification strategy using instrumental variable. But on top of that one, we also conduct a model extension as we consider firms' financial constraints, and we also consider heterogeneity analysis by separating our analysis between state-owned versus non-state-owned firms. And what we see now, at least at our preliminary stage, is that social trust becomes even more effective among firms that are financially constrained, and is more effective within non-state firms, rather is kind of redundant with state-owned firms. But we will see everything more in details in a few slides. Now, what the contribution is more, we focus more on of a mix between an institutional economic literature and kind of economic geography literature. But if we look at the agenda proposed by Alesina and Giuliano in 2015, by promoting more the possibility to look at the interplay between some cultural values and institutional values in different market economies. The literature then has focused a lot on social trust and research and development investment, but mainly across OECD countries, so at the country level and also at the regional level. A little attention at the beginning has been devoted to the economy like China, economy in transitions that are not just in the market transitions, but also in institutional transitions. So our contribution is essentially hope to enrich the research on the role of informal institutions on firms' innovation performance in this type of transition economies. Thinking also the fact that this type of economies essentially has been experiencing a very clear acceleration and in industrialization and urbanization, which are two elements that are very interlinked with the innovative performance. So inevitably, in these kind of economies, informal institutions have a key role in shaping the economic evolution of the performance at a different regional level and at a cross-regional level. So the role of social trust we consider is that, I mean, it's not far or detached from the literature so far. So trust, we know that enhances economic performance, improves financial development, firms' productivity, is associated with investment. So in the way it is defined by the institutional economic literature and on a broader sense, social trust is some sort of an informal institution reflecting the average trustworthiness of people and the expectation that these people or the economic actors around us will comply with both formal rules and informal social contracts. So trust in this respect is an element that increases cooperations and lower transaction costs. It creates ties and mutual collaboration among business partners, and that boosts somehow high-risk innovation investments. So within the firm's context, for example, a context with high social trust should facilitate somehow firms to consider more longer-term investment in innovations and productive processes. Of course, there is a very good plethora of literature showing the good elements and the good positive effect that the trust has on different aspects of the economy and different aspects of economic behaviors and preferences. So it improves merger performance, promotes venture capital, it helps companies obtain commercial credit, it reduces relational risk, peer-to-peer lending, and improving corporate financing environments, and so on. But what is intriguing here is the context. And the context is the Chinese economy, and mainly the idea that, as you, Marta, said at the beginning, one of the core aim of the Chinese economy is essentially is to focus a lot of innovation. Right? And Chinese economy is a transition economy, and from mainly an export-oriented economy to a more complex economy, relying upon a research and development-led innovation process and international partnership. So initially, these transitions have been attracted many studies, mainly at a country level. And recent attention then has been devoted towards the regional level. For example, if we pick up from a paper, an interesting paper in the Journal of Economic Geography from Crescenzi et al., the message was very clear in that paper, saying that the new research frontier for studies aspects of innovations are the emerging economies like India and China, because they are essentially increasing a lot of their expenditures in research and development over GDP. But what they argue in that paper that was quite intriguing was the fact that higher research and development expenditures over GDP at the country level was not essentially corresponding to a higher innovation. And so what the suggestion was to check it more at subnational levels. Now, why the subnational level? Because of the characteristics of the Chinese countries and the regions. They usually are affected by uneven innovation patterns across regions. So they got regions with essentially higher innovations and other regions a little bit less. So there is a kind of a disparities. And their evidence suggests that at that time, that the Chinese innovation is essentially replicating the classical tradition, is the narrative of the economic geography, in the sense that there is higher innovation where there is higher agglomeration of activities, and where there is better infrastructure and more industry specialization. So taking from that, from the institutional perspective, then there's been more attentions about the quality of formal institutions across the Chinese regions. This is because China is essentially characterized by an economic and institutional regional disparities, And somehow it reminds me a little bit Italy, but the regional formal institutions are responsible to make effective the regulations and the policies established by the central governments. So a better quality of institutional level at the regional context essentially would probably improve innovation somehow. But what we want to look at in this paper is the informal institutional aspects. Why? Because again, China is a vast territory, and where the development of religion, history, language, and the different cultural aspects has got heterogeneity across regions. And it's a typical relational society where trust is one of the key principles of life advocated by Confucianism. And essentially, this still influence culture and economic activities across regions. So trust in relationship is not only an important element across business, but also the environment and the radius of trust at the regional level becomes like some sort of societal asset. There is an interesting paper on Williams and Du. They provide a case study on 2-3 regions showing that essentially trust in relationship with local external partners promote subsidiaries' innovative outcomes, but they never then expand this one at the country level in a cross-regional pattern, let's say. So what we do is we combine data set, we consider social trust from the Chinese General Social Survey, which is based on the question in general social interactions or contracts that do not directly involve money interest. Do you think there are many people you can trust among strangers? And this is set on a Likert scale between 1 and 5, where 1 is mostly untrustworthy and 5 is mostly trustworthy. Then we use firms' financial variables and patent statistics from the China stock market and accounting research database. We conduct a panel analysis for the period 2012-2017, and as a dependent variable, we use the patents application. We follow the main literature here and arguing that the patents application essentially are somehow a reliable measure of innovative output, even though because of the skewness of the patent applications across regions, we use a natural log variable in natural logs +1. Of course, the patent applications don't come without a downside, in the sense that not all industries tend to patent with the same intensity, and not all industry patents, or not all companies patents. And this is why then we will see later on, we also do some robustness tests by using a Tobit model as well. On top of that, patent-based innovation indicators fail sometimes to consider differentiated degrees of novelty of patents products. And there are some innovational aspects or innovative aspects mostly related with process innovations that are not patentability. So there are some shortcomings of the patents application, but still, for most of the literature, is a relatively good proxy of innovations. On top of that, because of this shortcoming, we also use alternative measure of innovations to check whether our estimations tend to be consistent at least. And of course, we run our baseline model, and we also conduct a series of sensitivity analyses and extension of the models to try to keep the model consistent and see whether the initial estimation is valid. Now, this is a table with just the different variables and that we use. So we use variables following pretty much the main literature on innovation, and this is a table of the descriptive statistics. If you want, we can stop there later on and see and go back to these tables for the variables. But let me introduce you with an initial analysis. When we run our initial baseline model, so our functional form is essentially consider the natural log of patents regressed by trust and a series of variables at the firm's level, at the regional level. And the column 1 shows an initial regression without industry fixed effect and year fixed effect. And the column 2, we add industry and year fixed effect. And it seems that there is a quite consistent, positive and statistically significant relationship between trust and number of patent applications across Chinese provinces, across Chinese regions. What we do, because as I mentioned before, some shortcoming of the patents, or the variable patents, so we rerun our regressions by using a Tobit model, so column 1. And we rerun our regressions by replacing patents numbers applications with patents over research and development. And still we keep the same control variables plus industry and year fixed effects. And we see that the positive association and statistically significant association between trust and the innovation variables are persistent across these also model specifications. So what we also do, we carry on with our analysis, is essentially to try also to address some endogeneity issues that can be within our baseline model. So we follow Guizhou et al. And by using blood donation as an instrument for social trust, as in Guizhou et al. 2014 and 2016, blood donation essentially is highly correlated with social trust, but not necessarily directly correlated with the number of patents applications. And we also use ethnic diversity as an instrument that is negatively correlated to social trust, essentially following Dinesen and Soderskov. And also, if you want, Alesina and La Ferrara showed something like that in 2005, but is not essentially directly correlated to the patents applications. Our two-stage least square shows again consistency in the relationship between trust and innovation, or trust and number of patents applications. What we think about it then is we thought about, okay, this is the baseline model, it seems it's working. We try to find model extensions to make to disentangle a little bit of the role of trust towards innovation. And what we think about is a financial constraint. We know the financial constraint, or essentially innovation, implies somehow access to credit for bank loans for financing, and financial constraint essentially is one of the obstacles in that respect. And social trust identifies the beliefs that other members in the community in general are trustworthy. So social trust is somehow treated here as a societal asset, helping the creation of what Deottati calls the environment of custom or reciprocal cooperation, in which economic actors tend to comply with code of conducts rely upon norms of cooperative behaviors, collaborations, and institutional compliance. And so this seems essential for keeping promises among actors within both financial agreements, business, subcontracting, as well as non-paper contracts, also in high innovative sectors. So within, if we consider the radius of trust, individuals tend to comply with norms of cooperative behaviors within the radius of trust. So what we do is essentially we rerun our model by including financial constraints, but also including the interaction between trust and financial constraints. And what we find is that, it's not surprisingly, there is a negative relationship between financial constraints and the number of patents applications, but we find that the interaction terms between trust and financial constraints is positive and statistically significant. So this, one of the possible interpretation is that trust becomes even more effective within firms that are financially constrained. Somehow recalling the literature of the slides before. What we do then is that, okay, so trust is effective for financial constrained firms, but not all the firms are financially constrained the same way. So we follow the literature of Crescenzi and also of Guan and Liu, quite a recent literature, showing that and discussing that state-owned firms, unlike non-state-owned firms, tend to have less financially constrained problems, as they take advantage of their political connections and government endorsement. So it's what Crescenzi et al. Calls politically motivated locations of firms. So they said that state-owned firms tend to be less innovation-oriented, but even when they are innovation-oriented, they tend to localize in geographical areas influenced by political motivations and by political connections, such that they tend to have less constraint in terms of access to credit or access to other resources. So when we run our heterogeneity analysis, so we divide it between non-state-owned and state-owned firms, we find that trust is essentially positively associated to innovations, mainly within non-state-owned firms, and is essentially redundant for state-owned firms. I mean, it seems that it's not, it's positive, but it's not statistically significant. And we also find that it is a bit more effective for high-tech industry, but there, I'm afraid, we didn't investigate that much, and probably will be nice food for thought then. But that is an interesting result in our opinion so far. So, in conclusions, I will give you a conclusion, and then I would like to share with you our further steps that we want to do for our papers, because it's not finished here. Unfortunately, we couldn't run these analyses that we want to do, also because we have to collect further data about it, but which are available, but we haven't collected yet. Innovation, in conclusion, we found for the moment innovation is higher in context with more social trust, which is essentially which is a good sign and what we could expect. But this relationship is particularly more pronounced for firms that are financially constrained, and mainly for non-state-owned firms rather than state-owned firms. So this informal institutional asset, or this societal asset, essentially seems to be more effective for firms that, which property right is more for non-state owners, okay, or non-state owners. Okay? And this is quite an interesting, in my opinion, application of the radius of trust to innovation so far. Now, considering that trust has characteristics of persistency, and as informal institution can also be exacerbated by formal institutions' transmission mechanism, one of the extensions that we were thinking to do is essentially to consider also the level of the formal institutions, and to consider the interaction or the complementarity between the quality of formal institutions and the informal institutions at the regional level. This is particularly valid in emerging economies experiencing aspects of institutional transitions. So, a further extension of this paper, we look at the synergies between formal and informal institutions and see how this one can essentially reflect on the innovation level in the firms across regions. Now, other further steps and further analysis that unfortunately we couldn't do it for the seminar so far would be to run also our model by looking at regional fixed effects. And also to look at the interaction between social trust and financial constraints within the heterogeneity model, so within the state-owned versus non-state-owned firms, and see whether this confirms even more the fact that social trust is essentially a more valuable asset for highly financially constrained firms. And that would be nice to see the mechanisms of social trust and financial constraint. That is so these entangled social trust and financial constraints. I look at social trust as a potential mechanism for easing access to credit. And of course, as I mentioned before, to look at the interaction between formal and informal institutions, so by including formal institutional quality at the regional level, and by including also educational institutions, so human capital. These are the 5 steps that we are thinking to conduct in the next weeks or so that we can see whether this relationship between social trust and innovation can have a more detailed explanation in this respect. I stop here. Thank you so much, and happy to receive feedback, questions, and suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you, Luca. Very interesting presentation. Maybe we can stop registering now.